Welcome to the Emblazers show, where B2B leaders are igniting revenue. I'm your host, Abby Kerr, and on today's episode, my colleague and co-host Tim Riesterer sat down with Dr. Leff Bonney. Leff Bonney is a behavioral scientist and founder and research director at the Florida State University Sales Institute, which just so happens to be one of Emblaze's primary research partners. And Leff is also an associate professor of sales and marketing at FSU. Leff spent a decade in sales and sales management roles before becoming a leading sales researcher, specializing in customer selection as well as adaptive sales strategies and methodologies. So he has a lot of street cred as well as academic cred. On today's episode, Tim and Leff are going to be discussing 3 recent research studies that Leff and his team conducted, all of which are designed to help leaders and their teams drive better sales performance. Let's go to the episode right now.
Hey, Leff, it's great to have you back on the show. You're going to be like one of those recurring guests, I'm sure. All my references for like recurring guests are old, like Johnny Carson or The Love Boat or things like that, or, like the same cameos by the same people. But good to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Speaking of old, so I was, I'm always intrigued by what gets pumped into your social media feeds, and for whatever reason, all of a sudden I'm getting Monty Python like clips. And what was funny was it was the one where the guy yells, "There are those who call me Tim," and I thought, "Oh, I'm coming on with Tim." Like, I wonder if it's listening to the point that it's
right. It's pulling mutually interesting Monty Python clips where I'm referenced. Yeah, Tim the Enchanter, I think, is the line that goes with that.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll own that.
We lost everyone under 40.
Right. Google, everybody, just go figure that out. They won't even laugh because I think the sense of humor there has maybe been lost upon another generation. Yep. Well, anyways, good to have you. We just spent a couple months ago now, I think we were in Savannah, Georgia together for the Emblaze Executive Retreat. We had about 35 senior sales leaders, CS leaders, customer success leaders in a room. And a lot of what they did in that room was share best practices with each other. And we facilitated them networking with each other. But there were a couple keynotes, and you delivered both those keynotes. And after all was said and done, even all the good networking, you were the highest rated content at the event. So no surprise. A little sad for me since I brought some content to the event too, but that's okay.
Well, you went before me, so maybe there was just a halo effect, right? They
the first person gets the low score. No, the judge needs to leave room. This is like, my daughter was in gymnastics, and you never want to go first on the beam because you'd do great, but you'd get a low score because I got to leave some room for somebody to do better. Yeah. Anyways, good. So I want to talk about those 2 topics that you brought to the table that were so well perceived. Research that you've done, because it's always research based. So differentiation and the power of differentiation anymore in a world of AI and product similarities, and the levers of leadership, a really interesting take on how to think about aligning manager leaders with their teams. So why don't you start off with the differentiation bit, and I'll try to add color and value, but we know your content's great. So why don't you share with the audience what you found?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, that was a great event. And for anyone listening, if you haven't been to an Emblaze executive retreat, you ought to think about going, because it's just such a great place to just have sort of the hair's down, everyone's relaxed, and we're just talking about the issues that are facing, the world of revenue and sales generation. And so I guess what was kind of nice about the way you guys teed that up there was a lot of discussion, as always these days, about AI and what it's doing and how it's changing the world. And it was fun to then go up on stage with this idea of, hey, yeah, but we got to talk about this thing called differentiation, because customers just say to us at FSU and any research I'm doing out in the field, hey, look, everybody's walking and talking and sounds exactly the same. And what's interesting when you hear people talk about AI is they never talk about the fact that, hey, if I'm using AI and you're a competitor and you're using AI, do our AIs just sound exactly the same too? Like, do we just continue to create this, perpetuate this issue of hey, we're all using the same tools, thinking we're getting an advantage in the marketplace when all we're doing is sort of fighting to a stalemate. And I use the example at the conference, speaking of old movies, of war games. For those of you who've never seen this film, it was Matthew Broderick back in the 80s. It was all about how the U.S. military was using AI to determine, should we basically start a nuclear war, or how are we going to defend against a nuclear war? And this AI machine in the movie kind of goes rogue and starts trying to launch missiles. And the way Matthew Broderick defeated the algorithm was he made it play tic-tac-toe. And it played tic-tac-toe over and over and over again. And it kept realizing, like, hey, us and the opponents are going to do the same thing. There's really no win here. It's only a stalemate every time. And so the computer system kind of backs off and shuts down and says, whoa, just like tic-tac-toe, nuclear war is a stalemate proposition. No one's going to win this. Basically, everybody loses. And I thought, what an appropriate analogy for what we're doing with AI today around, we're all using it. It's all speeding up. We're all, trying to get faster and better. But if we're all doing the same things, the customer sees the same thing coming to them in terms of the experience they get. So what was provocative or fun to talk about, I think, sort of in the cocktail hours and the lunches was, I made the statement, AI trains to a standard. AI pushes sellers to sort of meet a standard, but by definition, a standard is something everybody does. And so are we, I think that's a question I continue to pose to the world, Tim, is AI really giving us an advantage, or is AI just keeping us at status quo or stalemate level with our competitors? And so that was a fun discussion that was had there.
Well, it teed it up, right? I like then the idea that your tagline to differentiation was selling past the stalemate. And so if we speed things up, like we're more productive and we can have more engagement with customers, more at bats with customers, and we're all saying the same thing, there's you like, now you're stuck. Like, how do you get past the stalemate? And two things that I thought were important there is that's still the domain of the human. The human gets us past the stalemate. The AI keeps us at pace with the changing, like, say, bar. But now you still got to break through. And who can create the experience when they're engaging with the buyer that brings that differentiation to the table? And I think that was the thing. So selling past the stalemate, I think that's going to be the header or the subheader of your book once you get it done. So talk to us about what it takes, what it looks like. What does differentiation look like in this new world order?
Well, so one of the first thing I think we have to start thinking about when we say, what are we even differentiating? And what I mean by that is, most people, when I stand in a room and talk about differentiation, it takes them a few minutes to realize there's really two kinds of differentiation. The first is at the product or the solution level. What's different about the offering that I'm bringing to the table that would make me stand out or have an advantage over a competitor? And I would argue, when we've gone in and looked at, like, for sales training programs, for example, and we say, hey, show us where you're teaching your sellers to differentiate, the content we're always seeing is around the products and the solutions or the services, whatever it is. It's about the thing that you're selling. Here, let's show customers the differences here. And that's a flawed approach for a couple of reasons. The first one being, as the statistics say, the advantages you have on the product or the service level are incredibly short-lived, because everything can be copied so quickly these days that and this stat is probably already outdated. But at the beginning of this year, I looked up, and there was a Harvard study that said a product advantage in the marketplace these days only lasts 6 to 10 months before it's basically been neutralized by a competitor with their own widget that is like that. So where I'm going with this is trying to teach your sellers, hey, let's just always differentiate on the product or on the solution or on the service, is tough, because it's just always going to be copied and neutralized quick. It goes right back to a stalemate. at the product level.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a steeplechase. You keep having to get over stalemate one, then stalemate number two. And we've lived with that. Like the window of innovation is shortening, but it's always been hard to defend because it closes pretty rapidly. Now it's probably not a window of innovation anymore. Maybe it's just a crack. I don't know. I mixed up the metaphor there, but yeah, I love it. So the next thing we should talk about is where differentiation still exists. And I was there, so I know where you're going with this, Leff, so I'm not going to steal your thunder. Check and, strike one, strike two on stalemates. What's left? Where's differentiation actually going to take place?
Yeah. So what we've been studying a lot at our place down in FSU is the idea that the seller themselves is the source of differentiation. What they're doing and how, they are interacting with customers and the experience they create with the customer is the source of differentiation. And we've done a lot of really interesting studies. We've presented them both at the executive retreat. We did it at the summit last year. But the short story is on the research is what we found is when a seller comes across in a very creative and different way than what the norm is for what other sellers in that space are doing, it actually has an attribution effect that where the buyer starts thinking, hey, this person not only is more creative as a seller, their products must be better. And what was interesting about the research is we even controlled for product quality and innovation. Like they were all the same in these studies. Like the product was the same. But when we had a seller changing up the way they approached a customer in a creative and a value, providing way above the competitors, the customer actually gave the product and the service more credit.
A classic sort of halo effect,
really
if in action, right?
Yeah. So when we looked at, okay, so what are those things? Like what are some examples? So that's really now where we're spending our time. We've moved past the does it matter? We're convinced it does. We've moved past it's not about the product. It's now about the seller and the experience they create. So now we're looking at, so what are those? What are some of those things? And we've come at this from an experimental design. We've come at it from surveys with customers. And now, luckily, we've had some of our sponsors share their conversational data where they've recorded recorded sales interactions. So now we're mining that. And so we got lots of sources to look at what are these sort of creatively different sellers doing. And we've come up with a litany of things, actually. But one of my favorites, for example, and we shared it at the conference, was this idea of, just seeding. Hey, let me just tell you the experience you're going to get as you start this journey of making a decision. So this is a seller saying that to a buyer. Let me just tell you how this whole thing is going to play out. Right. And when you go to competitor A, here's the kind of experience you're going to get from them. And when you go to competitor B, here's what they're going to do. And oh, by the way, here's what we're going to do. Some of it's the same, some of it's different. But you just need to be aware of sort of the pros and cons of how we all approach our sales efforts to you, okay? In a very neutral way, right? And sort of just doing that, what we have found in the research creates such a credibility level with the buyer, because they're going, hey, this person's pretty smart. They have been around the block to the point that they can kind of predict competitor movements and competitor actions. This is somebody who really knows the industry, knows the market, and is going to be a good resource for me. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting example of a way that somebody is having a very different conversation with a buyer, and one that, frankly, the other competitors aren't having.
Being able to do that deftly, so you're not like bagging on the competition. You're just sort of laying out how this is going to go down. And there's a level of confidence. There's a level of trust that's built.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're also like helping them get clarity, because they're going to hear a lot of stuff from a lot of people. And you're just sort of putting it into nice, simple, concrete ways to think about it. So it's hard to know which part of that is the most impactful, but I know that you've cleverly looked at these differentiators and they all start with S. So you said the word seed. Was that seed? Is that?
Yeah, it's seeding. I'm kind of seeding with the customer what's going to happen, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm kind of
planting the seeds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's another effect here, Tim, that we found that is why it's a persuasive tactic in your favor as a salesperson. And what it is when the customer then gets in front of the competitor and the competitor actually does what you said they were going to do, the customer isn't thinking about them anymore. They're thinking about you, right? They're thinking about, boy, that other rep I just talked to predicted this. And yep, here's this competitor doing exactly what they said they were going to do. And if you follow that thread a little farther, what it's saying to the customer is, these other guys aren't even going to change up their pitch for you. Like they're running around with a standard, use it everywhere, you're not special, to the point that I can predict what they're going to do. It's just, they're just pitching stuff to you, right? And so that is really also something that gets seeded into the mind of the customer. And so again, they get in there, the competitor falls for the trap. They do exactly what they normally do. And now that customer's going, yeah, how special am I as a customer if the other guy could predict that you were going to do this to me when I got in the room?
Right. Once you seed it, they can't unseed it.
That's
can't unhear it, can't unseat it. That's my new one. And there's 7 of these S's that I know you're working on. We just touched on one. This is only a podcast. Is there another one you want to lay on us that people could take away? And then the rest, leave them wanting more.
Yeah, sure. Well, the other one is kind of gets at what I was saying about the creatively different, which is another S is surprise. So sort of surprising the customer that, hey, the customers even starts, look, our sellers, our buyers have been around the block enough to know they can often predict how's this going to go, right? Like when these next 4 finalists come in the room, we can predict what they're going to do. And there's almost like this, I don't know if monotony or boredom or something, but it's like, yeah, we have to suffer through what everybody's going to do to get at the answers we need to make a decision. And then all of a sudden a seller comes along and breaks that prediction. Like they don't do what the customer had anticipated. And we called this surprise because, you can almost watch customers on some of the video recordings we were watching almost kind of had this taken back kind of moment of, this seller is not doing what we kind of thought that they thought they would do. And so that breaks the, Carmen Simon, who's a contributor to Emblaze and CBI and other places, she talks about this idea called pattern breaking. You're breaking a pattern, catching someone off guard, but it does all kinds of stuff. It heightens their interest, heightens their engagement levels, makes you more memorable. And honestly, those are some of the variables we used in the study that actually showed when you break the pattern, they think your product or service is actually better. They give you credit for being innovative, even on the product and service side, beyond just the experience side.
It takes guts, though, to break a pattern. I mean, part of the buyer's problem is they put sellers into this position by saying, here's your agenda, here's what a finals pitch should look like. I want you to hit these marks. And then does one dare go in and break that pattern? I recently had that experience where I knew, in our case, we were kind of in second position based on the incumbent we were up against. And there was a pattern they laid out. And I'm like, I think we got to be different because Leff told me I got to be different. And, or I got to be surprising. I got to keep it on the S train. Got to be surprising, and did so with good results. But to the point where the person who had organized it said, that was great. You did wonderful. You impressed all these people. You didn't do what we told you to do, but hey, it was still, and happy to report we vaulted to, for at least for the moment, to the front runner position. And it just, I'm like, it worked. But you can make a few people nervous, including your own team members, doing it. So how do you get over that to know that it's worth taking a shot? Because at the end of the day, all things created equal, I got to be different. What encouragement do you have for sellers to believe this is a practical reality, not just something in Leff's lab?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, there's a lot in that question in the sense of, another way to even frame what you're saying is how much is too much on the differentiation side. If I show up juggling chainsaws and I have pyrotechnics in my finalist presentation, that's going to be pretty different, but probably way over the top, right? So there is a balancing act, and I think this is where, just having champions in the account, the good old fashioned, hey, let me run an idea by you. I know you want to see it this way, but can I explain to you why we'd like to maybe do this or that when we come in with our, and so get a little feedback before you try your surprise action on a big purchase or a big buying team. That'd be one idea. The other is just sort of thinking through, and this is kind of where we think the next iteration of research is going to go, which is when to play it safe versus when to break the mold or when to be different. Because, all about me. I'm all about the adaptive, agile. There's a time and a place for everything. There's no such time and place to do the same thing every time, right? So what I'm getting at here is, what are the wins? When should I do that? When should I not? But your example is a good one. And what we're finding is, if I'm not the incumbent, what do I got to lose?
Right.
What do I got to lose? So why not go ahead and take a shot at showing some creative differences in the way we're approaching the process? Because again, we're not going to win otherwise. So we might as well give it a whirl.
Yeah, you might as well stir the pot a little bit. So stir. I'm going to give you another S, like maybe surprise. And I would tell you that one of the first things, and people who've known me long enough, and you've known me long enough, is the first 5 to 6 minutes was a whiteboard when everybody's expecting and has been handed out the PowerPoint deck. And now there's no surprises because they're leafing through it. Yeah. You go to the whiteboard and tell them and show them something that isn't in the deck, and they all have to pay attention. And hopefully it's provocative and interesting and surprising. But just the art of doing that is all those things. And then when you leave the room, it's still up there, and it's a constant reminder of the difference. And so I think it can be the way you do it. Juggling chainsaws would be awesome. But I was in an event where somebody had baked cookies in the shape of the logo of the company. And we were one of those pitches where they come out, you go in, and they were super sad. Their tray was still full of cookies. And what we found out is they couldn't take gifts. And that was seen as like a gift. And I'm like, oh, be careful when you choose your surprise. No, you got to know that that's in the company rule book.
Yeah. So, Tim, I guess I just want to bring this around to where we started, right? I started with this crazy analogy about an AI tool, playing tic-tac-toe and realizing that things are a stalemate. But I do want to kind of bring everything we were talking about this sort of creatively different back to where everybody is going so fast with AI tools aiding in training the training of salespeople. Because all these, I've seen them, all the AI companies come to FSU wanting our students to use their tools. I've seen the behind the curtain on just about all of them. And look, we all know what they're doing. You're loading a standard rubric into the tool, and you're asking the tool to then watch a role play or even facilitate a role play with a student, and then it's going to grade them against the rubric. And what these companies say, well, the reason we get past the robotic part of it is, hey, as each company plays with this, you can load your own rubrics. But regardless, you're still basically putting in a standard of what you want, quote, everyone to do, and then you're using the tools to train to that, which is fine for the foundational skills. Asking good questions is universal. Yes, there's some things you could probably do to be different, even in your discovery. But for the most part, there's some things that foundationally we want you to do when you go talk to a customer for the first time. I get it. AI is a role play tool or something to get feedback to sellers is fine. But what about what we were just talking about? Hey, we need to actually do something different that's on the rubric because we know our competitors are all doing that. And so in this situation, we need to surprise the customer. In this situation, it makes sense for us to maybe seed for how this is going to go. And at the moment, AI would actually give me negative points for that. If I tried to use AI to practice, I'm going to do something creative. AI, here it goes. And now here comes a terrible score on my AI training tool, right? So all I'll end on here is just warning all our L&D friends and people that are all in on AI as an efficient tool to train sellers. just know it trains them to the stalemate. It doesn't train them to move past it by being creative and different in sales experiences.
If I could pile on for a second, I see the same thing happening when people think about their methodology and they're like, we need our medic or med pick filled in, or we need our blue sheet or green sheet filled in. That there's, and yet the client can't justify a decision. There's nothing in completing your methodology that's going to help a client justify a decision or believe there's value or have confidence that there's enough differentiated contrast. None of that comes out of the methodology. That still requires the seller to create a buying experience that is different. And so, yeah, there are so many things being put in place to create and run a solid engagement, a predictable, forecastable engagement, forgetting that at some point somebody's got to get in front of a customer with their lips moving and they better not suck. So that's all we're talking about today. The final S is suck or don't suck. All right, we got to shift to the other topic. Levers of leadership is a great alliteration. And what I would say is the concept and the research and then the business case that you presented had people's maybe a little hyperbolic, but jaws hitting the floor because it was such a counterintuitive leadership, management, talent, team assignment concept. But now you've got evidence to prove that it works. So back us up, tell us about the original research, and then we'll talk about the case study that you shared.
Yeah. Well, the idea started with a, as I said at the executive retreat, it was a failed engagement with FSU because we did what we thought was a good project for one of our sponsors who said, can you develop a leadership playbook for our sales team, our sales leaders? And, arrogantly, we said, no problem. We got this. And we did what we thought would be great method to produce this, which was let's just go benchmark great managers out in the field, learn what they're doing, and write it up in a playbook that we'll train to, and everybody can do it like that. And we did, and it failed. In fact, we actually did harm in certain teams where after the launch of the book, they went backwards. The team went backwards. And so when we regrouped and thought about what did we do wrong here, there's a flaw in the way people define a great manager. And what I mean by that is just about every book I've ever read on especially in sales, coaching, sales leadership, the way they're defining a great manager is the sum of the team's performance. The sum of, if I got 5 people on my team, it's the sum of their performance. And what's getting neglected in that, okay, so then the manager's performance is just the sum of how well each individual does. Well, what if I have 5 great sellers on my team? I'm not a great manager in that situation. I'm just the manager of great sellers. But my numbers make me look like I'm this world-class leader, right? The other problem is, hey, maybe you actually really are a great leader for those 5 all-stars. But is what you're doing what you would do if you had the Bad News Bears? You're coaching the.
Sorry, warning. We should put 70s references, 1970s references, warning labels on everything.
How did I do this? I got primed with my Monty Python clips before I came.
Yeah, right. Well, here you go. But just assume everybody, the Bad News Bears were a Little League team that were really bad. So All-Stars versus Bad News Bears. Got it.
Yeah.
What if your next big revenue move didn't come from a blog post or a cold LinkedIn scroll, but from a real conversation with leaders who've been there?
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
Meet Emblaze, a community of sharp B2B minds, CROs, CSOs, rising stars, sharing what's actually working in sales, enablement, and customer growth.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside of other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Join a monthly forum, dig into science-backed strategy, and get insight you won't find in your feed. Start your Emblaze journey today at emblazegrowth.com.
Right. So the behaviors of a great leader who is managing that all-star team, What we went in and did a bunch of research after the fact, what we found is, you know what? The behaviors of the manager who's managing the not so great team, but is doing a good job, meaning I'm actually moving that team, or even an individual seller who's not a good seller, performance issues, they're a rookie, they don't know what they're doing, they got attitude issues, whatever it is, the manager who's able to move that person up and out of underperforming into average, like that's a good leader. But the problem is, if you were only using leader total performance of the team, you would miss that. You would miss that that person is actually doing a good job developing what is considered a problem child on their team, right? So what we did is we said, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's look at leaders who are in. So what we did is we segmented sellers into problem children, rookies, middle of the road, all-stars, and then what we called consistent contenders, people who are almost there, right? And what we did is then we said, let's find leaders that are moving those kinds of salespeople up into the next category. So then let's map what they did to move the problem child back to average. And let's map what the manager who moved an average performer into the consistent contender group, what they did. And we mapped it. So now what we built was a recipe card by rep type. So bad rep, bad attitude. Again, we call them problem children. Here's your playbook for that rep. And then, oh, by the way, you got a rookie. They're underperforming just because they're just haven't caught up to everybody else yet. Still have great attitudes. They're just new. Here's your playbook to lead that person up to the next level of performance, which would be, the average group. And then once that person hits average, you got to throw away that recipe card. And now I got to get off the average one. And figure out now, how do I move that rep up to the next level using a different set of behaviors? They're not the same leadership behaviors across all those groups. So I'll pause there and say,
yeah, I mean,
sense?
Yeah, that to me, that's where I get it. Levers of leadership. There are different buttons to push or levers to pull based on rep type, as opposed to here's the best practice of the quote unquote most successful managers. And then we're shocked when those things don't work on other teams or individual reps. And I think there's a lot of momentum now to say, hey, we should use AI analyze what is going on in our company and what's causing success, and then blanket those methodologies, those manager habits across everybody. And you're saying, no, wait, we already know that doesn't work. Why is everybody promoting that as a thing? So got it. So different rep types need different manager sort of coaching and intervention to move them to the next level. So got it. And now every manager potentially has 5, 6, 7 reps, and you might have a couple with this recipe card, a couple with that recipe card. So you have to be somewhat situationally fluent in your coaching, which it can be taxing.
Well, there's a less here, right? Unless you have a really bold leader, senior leader who did what I talked about at the executive retreat. And what
I was just teeing that up. I knew what you had to say.
It was
that was all I was doing.
Well done, Tim. The idea here was, like Tim just said, if you think about it as, yes, I get it. I got to have a different set of behaviors to lead my rookie, and then I got to have a different set of behaviors to lead my my all-star, and then different for the in-between reps. The cognitive load on a manager to shift back and forth is really tough. Right? So what we've learned is it's actually better to put all the same kind of reps under one manager. And when I say we've learned it, we've had one company try it. It had incredible results in terms of this company shifting to a model that said, let's let our manager who's best with onboarding reps, the newbies, that's all they do. They wake up every day with a team of newbies and they get them, their goal is to get them to average. We have another manager who handles our problem children. We jokingly call them the principal's office, right? They're going to run to the principal, but they're going to turn them around. Like, they're going to keep that rep from leaving the business. They're going to move them from problem to average. And then we have some managers that are great with average. So give them the average rep, right? And then the all-star, right? That takes a lot of skill to manage an all-star team, right? And it's a different, like even the managers just got to kind of be a different person. So why make them manage all the other types? Just give them all-stars. right? And so this company gave it a whirl, and man, it has made a massive difference in their performance, and their turnover, and their employee satisfaction. And you started this conversation by saying it's kind of counterintuitive. It's only counterintuitive for us, Tim, because when you think of us meaning the sales industry, when you think of the military, you get a leader who is your boot camp person. Then you get handed to a new leader when you get your first assignment. And then as you become maybe a Top Gun or Navy SEAL expert, you get a different leader for that. If you think of sports, and I'm a baseball player, I go to single A as a pro player. That's a coach who's going to develop me. And then I'm going to go to double A, and that's going to be a different coach, and then triple A. By the time I get to the majors, that's a different kind of coach doing different things, because I need different things as a player when I develop to that level. So it's not counterintuitive for the rest of the world, but for some reason, these sales organizations do this weird, give one manager a hodgepodge group of sellers and make them have to bounce back and forth between all the recipe cards. We're the ones that don't make sense here.
Well, thanks for that qualification. Well, that's kind of a mic drop moment, Leff. I have so many more questions, though, but just what I heard you say is that we think this is a breakthrough because we just don't do it this way. We have territories, we have different segmentation strategies, and every manager gets who they get relative to that breakdown. And your big idea is that a manager is probably good at managing a certain seller type. You need you're going to have all seller types. You can't have all stars. And so let's align a manager who's good at that seller type and load them up with that seller type. And you saw great results for this company. I don't know, are there any highlights you can give us in terms of what those results look like before and after?
They were averaging, I want to say, somewhere in the 4 to 5% growth per year. And they sort of made this full transition. I want to say around 22, they were kind of done with it. So they've had kind of 2.5 years of data. And since they've made that transition, they're into the 14, 15% per year growth. So in some ways you could say as a growth percentage, they've tripled it. Now, I'm a researcher. I know it's not all attributable to this wonderful idea. Things happen in the world that also impact, but you can't neglect the significance of that switch in 22 and then all of a sudden really good outcomes on the way. The other thing they measure is, I think they had an employee satisfaction score that they would give to both managers and reps. I want to say that thing went up by literally 10, 15%. If before we rated it a 60, it's now 75, 80% satisfaction rate with what's going on in the business. And listen, that only makes sense, right? Because you got a newbie salesperson going, man, I got a perfect manager who's great at helping newbies get better. And it shows up. They're excited to come do that every day. And then likewise, you also get a manager who's equally as satisfied. Like, I love watching the new people go on to bigger and better things. I love being a part of that. I'm happier in this role. This is what I like to do. And so, both, qualitatively and quantitatively, the company has been very pleased with the switch to this model.
I'm sure you'd be willing to help company number 2 and number 3 along this way. So you can find Leff Bonney at Florida State University and their sales institute. It's called the Levers of Leadership. If you hit them up, you're on LinkedIn and elsewhere, I'm sure. But I'm sure what I love is it seems super counterintuitive. And then when you hear it, it seems a little obvious. And that's good, because sometimes when it's counterintuitive and still seems really off, we just don't do it. But if it's counterintuitive and it seems like, well, if that makes sense, we're willing to take a shot at it. And I'll never forget when we did the research for our last book, The Expansion Sale, and we validated that existing customers, you needed to reinforce status quo bias, not disrupt it, because you are the status quo bias. And it turned out that was right. And everyone else was trying to challenge and provoke all customers, including existing customers. And we're like, Eureka, we found this amazing thing. Scientists like you were like, we've known status quo bias is a thing for like 30 years. You just found it out now in the sales arena to be true as well. And I'm like, what is it about sales, which is supposed to be all people driven, that we still get surprised by people-y things like this?
Yeah. 100%. I mean, sales, there's a lot of, we've always done it that way thinking in sales. That's, to me, one of them. It's like, oh, you've always structured teams like this. Like, why would we ever do anything different? And when you just look up and look around the rest of the world, I'm a huge fan of analogies. Let's look at analogies to us and see, are they doing it that way? And when you see sports and education and all these other military where they don't do it that way, it's amazing how that paradigm can shift very quickly. And you say, oh yeah, of course. Wait, what are we doing here?
There is mountains of unexamined folklore in sales, and we keep finding that every day. So we do win-loss studies, and one of the things we find is when we ask the buyer, why did you choose this company or choose its competitor, and we ask the seller why you think you won or lost on the same deal, we get a different answer 70% of the time. But yet a lot of companies are like, let's ask our sellers why we win or lose. Let's ask our sellers, No shade to sellers. We're on the front lines. We hear things, but we also don't have a great ability to understand cause and effect. And so when you get and find that a buyer sees something completely different, you have to scratch your head a little bit and say, which data set am I going to believe? So there's just something about how we get in our own heads in the sales game and use gut and opinion and personal experience and think that we've got a scientific method. So I always appreciate you bringing real science to it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's fun. I think I do like challenging the status quo of our own beliefs, and this Levers of Leadership is certainly a great example of. I don't think I'm bringing anything earth-shattering to the table. It's just making it fit in a sales world is the newness of it, and it is hard. Like, this company did go through some trial and errors. They were moving people around, and obviously things like some comp structures and how many people are going to be on each team, and what if I don't have enough rookies yet, and what is that manager going to do? I mean, there's lots of things you got to think through to make that kind of change. But I'm convinced on an N of one that it's in the right situations, it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of thought-provoking stuff today. Differentiation in terms of the seller being that last bastion of differentiation when methodology and AI and products are all at parity. The thing that's left is a seller with their lips moving. And you gave us a couple good examples today. Somewhere along the line, we'll share the 5 remaining S's. And then on the leadership level, there's things that can be done that, for argument's sake, are super different and creative that can break through. And that's what we need. We're all looking for breakthrough growth, and we're all trying to run the same play. So let's look for some surprising seeding and levering types of ideas. Leff, always a pleasure. Thanks for being here. You'll be back. And always with the highest rated content. So thanks for that.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And I will try to move my references into the 90s for our next show.
I was raising kids in the 90s, so my references have a lot to do with kid shows. So we'll both work on this, everybody. So forgive us and thank heaven for Google.
That's right.
All right. Till next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Amazing episode, Tim and Leff. So much food for thought in there for revenue leaders and their teams. Thank you for joining us. Check out the Emblaze community at emblazegrowth.com and be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast so you can keep getting it in your feed. We'll see you next time.